like to welcome everyone to the webinar, Navigating the Canine Police Import Business, Part 2, the Solutions. Presented, our featured speaker is Steve Pearson from Performance Kennels. Before we get started, I'd like to recognize a fallen officer. His name is Nick Reisner. Nick is a sergeant down in the Sheffield, Alabama Police Department. I'll give you a little brief history. This just happened this past weekend. Nick was succumbed to gunshot wounds sustained last Friday when he was critically wounded during a shootout with an auto theft suspect in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. The suspect had shot the passenger of a vehicle he was riding in and pushed them out of the vehicle in the Muscle Shoals area. The man then stole another vehicle and drove into the city of Sheffield, where the vehicle was spotted by members of the Sheffield Police Department and pursued back into Muscle Shoals. Sergeant Reisner used his patrol car to block the suspect's vehicle after it drove into the Walmart parking lot. The man opened fire on officers, wounding Sergeant Reisner and another officer from the Sheffield Police Department. The suspect was also wounded in the exchange of gunfire and taken into custody. Sergeant Reisner was airlifted to Huntsville Hospital, where he succumbed to his wounds the next day. And we take this time to honor his memory. It's sad that we have to talk about this every once in a while, that these kinds of things still happen and people have been impacted greatly because of this. His family, his police department, and his friends in the area. So we just want to honor him for that. Steve, are you ready to go?
I am.
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Don. And yeah, I agree. I'm constantly reminded of how blessed I was in making it through a 30-year career without such a thing happening to me. And God bless everybody who's still out doing God's work. So thank you for that. I just want to do a little review. This is part 2 of a 2-part series on trying to navigate the import business of specifically of high quality green dual purpose dogs. And just for the purpose of review, I'm going to outline some of the more common areas of the fraud. You're looking at occasional fraudulent pet passports out of the European Union, altered pet passports. This is a very common one where single purpose dogs are sold as dual purpose quality. And they're simply not, they may be super single purpose dog, but they don't have the character for dual purpose. Your shipping dilemma is a very common problem where the importer pays for the shipping from Europe to the US, finds problems with a dog or 2 or 3, and has to ship them back to the exporter at his expense, only to have to pay for a third shipping of dogs back to the US again. So now he's into these dogs for 3 times shipping cost. And what happens if he's got problems on the third time on the next group of dogs? He's faced with that dilemma. Either try to sell these dogs and keep your head above water, or perpetuate the lie. Environmentally weak dogs, super common. Very common with sport dogs. That doesn't mean that a sport dog can't be a good patrol dog, but really, really be careful with your testing when you're testing a sport dog. And finally, teaching inadequate dogs to pass only the tests that the vendor will allow to be done with the dog. They don't allow you to do any other tests at the vendor's location or away from the vendor's location. So the dogs are taught how to pass a test on their home turf. And this is definitely a problem. So European exporters are generally not interested in selling direct to you or your agency. And I say generally because there's exceptions to everything. But honestly, it's not in your best interest to buy direct. You know, many people may say, you know what, why don't we cut the middleman out and let's just go direct? Think about it. Would you go direct to China to buy something you buy all the time that's imported from China? I mean, it's kind of silly. If you do, you're stuck with the shipping cost, you're stuck with the return shipping costs, and you're stuck with the shipping cost of your replacement dog, and you are stuck in the same position as the previously mentioned vendors are. So it's really not in your best interest. It's super difficult to navigate a warranty over the ocean. You know, you're simply not going to take legal action against an exporter for a $10,000 dog. Your city attorney is going to tell you to move on. It's hard to do. It's hard to enforce, you know, guarantees across the ocean. Many people in Europe have been defrauded by Americans who say, "Oh yeah, I'm a correct man. I'm going to send you money, no problem." And the Europeans send them the dog, and the Americans send them no money. Vice versa. Many Americans have sent European so-called dog people, and most of them that do this are not dog people; they're scam artists, and $50,000 to $100,000. And I know some of these things, transactions that have occurred. And oh, they had a good website, and they talked to talk on the telephone, and their emails were cool. And you send 50 grand over to some guy you don't know in Europe and don't get your dog, you shouldn't be surprised. So it's just not generally in your best interest. You want to go to a reputable importer, a reputable vendor, and trust but verify. That's what it takes. You have to learn and develop a relationship with a reputable importer. And how do you do that? You conduct background checks. You get references. You ask, where do the dogs come from? And you know, don't simply rely on claims on the internet. You know, everybody claims to have the best quality dogs. Of course, why wouldn't they? But then you get into some of the nonsense, you know, where we always have 20 to 25 of the finest quality green dogs in their kennels at all times. No, you don't. It's just not possible for that many people to have that many of the highest world-class quality green purpose dual or green dual purpose dogs in the world. It's just not. There aren't enough dogs. There just aren't enough dogs. If you're finding yourself going out and testing 20 dogs to find one, ask yourself, this does not pass the smell test. If you've got to test 20 to find one, who's going to buy those 19? Somebody will, for sure. Somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, and somebody who doesn't know how to test, and somebody who doesn't bring a subject matter expert with them, which is exactly what I recommend. If you don't have a subject matter expert in your agency, you need to hire one. And a subject matter expert is not somebody who was a good dog handler. They may have been, and they may be, but it's somebody with experience in testing dogs, somebody who has the time in and has perhaps been taken before, and understands how to test for certain environmental and behavioral and other character traits in these dogs. Ask the vendor what guarantee comes with the dog. A 1-year full health guarantee is super normal, but ask questions beyond that. Okay, so 1-year health, what does that mean? Well, what if in 3 months my dog develops cancer and he's got to be put down? Is that covered? Yes or no? It should be. Now, that doesn't mean that the vendor knowingly sold you a dog with cancer, but you also, it's not your fault he had cancer. It's not the vendor's fault. Typically, the vendor will have a relationship with his supplier and say, hey, nobody's fault here, but I'll eat some, you eat some. Let's make the customer happy. Let's do this thing right. Let's make it right. I have a health guarantee. I have to live up with it. Help me out. And most of these guys that export, they get it and they understand, and they do. They will make it right. Your trainability guarantee needs to be articulated. You need to understand exactly what that is, because if you're buying your dog from an individual who is not going to be the trainer, that trainability guarantee may be 30 days, maybe 2 weeks. It may be a tail light guarantee. I don't see your tail lights anymore. It's done. And this is understandable to a degree because the vendor can't control how you or your trainer trains your dog. So they don't want to be responsible for your dog not working for you if you improperly or incorrectly trained him or did things to your dog that you shouldn't have done and you ruined him. And now you're going to blame the vendor. So this is understandable. I mean 30 days is pretty normal. A lot of times if the trainer has a relationship with the vendor, that 30 days can be extended because the vendor knows that the trainer is competent, qualified, and doesn't use excessive compulsion, which will hurt a young dog. So there's wiggle room in there, but be clear when you're purchasing your dog exactly what is that guarantee. If your importer and trainer are the same person and or company, that guarantee is easy to manage. If the importer and trainer are different, however, then you need to make sure that your trainer is going to lobby on your behalf. He's going to be your advocate, and that's exactly what you want to do. So when you take possession of your dog, take possession of that pet passport. Pet passports are mandatory for all dogs in the European Union, and they cannot be shipped without one. You want to check that passport for areas that may have been altered, where whiteout has been used. Is the passport issued by the country where the importer said the dog came from? If not, start asking questions. You guys are all cops. You ask questions, you investigate. Don't change that just because you're hunting for a dog. You're still investigators, if you will. All dogs in the EU must be chipped, and these chips have to be a special ISO chip, right, as determined by the EU, and they're 15 digits long. If they're not 15 digits long, it's either a lie or it's not an EU approved chip. Here's your stereotypical EU passport. This one happens to be from Slovakia, and you'll see at the bottom it's got a passport number, starts with an SK, that stands for Slovakia, and your Czech Republic passport would start with a CC, Netherlands an NE, Great Britain, when they used to be part of the EU, would start with a GB, and so on. But this is your EU passport. That number on the bottom is found on each page throughout the passport, and it makes it difficult for anyone to alter it with that number. Inside the main cover of the passport, you will typically see that transmitter, transponder, or chip number in a barcode form. This is the chip that the exporter says is inside of your dog's body and is registered on the websites in the EU, which I'm going to get to in a little bit. You want to have that chip scanned by your vet at some point, make sure that it's the correct one and that your dog really was chipped and the chip does match this code and does match the passport. Alternatively, you may find the chip inside of the passport if they didn't stick those barcodes on there. And again, you can compare that chip number to the website that I'll show you in a little bit. And you also see the date that the chip was implanted in the dog. You go into the passport, and you're going to see your rabies on the left and your DH2P on the right. Basic vaccinations. The Europeans typically do not vaccinate for lepto and Lyme's, and most of them don't give heartworm. So you got to be aware of that. There are some EU countries that require frontline to be applied, and quite honestly, I think they may say they do it, but they may not do it. It costs money. The website that you can go to in Slovakia, this is the web address, and when you get into that main page on the website, you can see that you can enter either the passport number or the chip or tattoo number. The tattoo number is not really practical because they're super hard to read, but the chip number is easy. It's on the passport. Okay, once you enter that number, it'll say record found. It'll have an owner, telephone number. This is very basic information. What date the dog was certified for export, what the passport number is, and who the veterinarian is. You can go to the next page and get more detailed information, the gender, the birth date of the dog, and you see at the top it says date of birth 6/4/19. We would call that June 4th. They would call that the 6th day of April. So just a matter of explanation on how they read that. But again, your chip number is there, the location of the chip is there, passport number is there, and this is very basic information about your dog. This is not mind-blowing aha moment stuff, but this is basic stuff where you can start comparing numbers. I've seen passports that were fraudulent that didn't have a passport number on it. Well, it's not possible to register a passport without a passport number. So it's fraudulent. Why? Is the dog Is he 4 when you said he was 1? Has he been returned 3 times by other departments? Something's going on, and you need to run from that. There's other passport. One thing about these registration websites, they're not the say all tell all, but I mean, one little number can result in no record found. That's going to happen no matter what. I mean, that doesn't mean that the vendor is 100%, fraudulent and he's a crook. That doesn't mean that. The exporter can make a mistake for sure, but that should be the exception, not the norm. Okay, going over to these other passport registry websites. I don't know if you want to take a screenshot of those if you've imported a dog from these other countries, but every EU country has their own website. It's required by the EU. They have to register their dogs, and depending on the country you are getting your dog from, some of the countries over there are very, very strict on how they enforce these regulations, including jail time and loss of their license to practice veterinary medicine. So other countries don't care. They have the website because they're supposed to. If people don't register their dog, they don't care. They've got other things to worry about, feeding their people, and registering a dog to some governments is just not a top priority, and that's not good for us. But hopefully they did register it. Here's what the Czech Republic website looks like. You can search the registry for the information from the chip or the stamp number. That's going to be the passport number. And this one is from Hungary, and it's the same type of thing. All of these websites have areas where you can tab down to English rather than their native language, so they're pretty easy to navigate. This is the Netherlands, and it's the same basic thing. So looking further to your importer, did he do any other vet checking with your dog, or did he simply rely upon the pet passport? And I'm not saying that it's fraudulent to not conduct further vetting. A lot of importers do because they don't want to buy a dog that is sick and try to sell them without already fixing. Well, if I've got to keep a dog that's got heartworm and he's going to spend months in my kennel with zero activity, I think whoever sent him to me can fix him. I shouldn't ask a new customer to fix that dog. So if they haven't been tested for these diseases, heartworm, Lyme, and these tick-borne illnesses, you should, for sure. And if you believe in global warming, believe this: heartworm is there, and these other tick-borne illnesses are there, and you need to test for it. If you're going to keep the dog after a negative test, get them wormed and get them on the preventatives right away. It is not unusual at all for these dogs to have internal parasites, tapeworm, roundworm, etc. Just worm them. It's just not a big deal. Like I said before, the Europeans do not vaccinate for Lyme and leptospirosis as a general rule. I'm certain there's exceptions for all of that. X-rays of the hips and elbows need to be made available to you. This is a big one. Most of these are coming with in a digital format where you want the name of that dog on the X-ray, not on a little sticky on the outside of the X-ray, because it has been done where multiple sheets of X-ray film have been made of a dog with super good X-rays, and they just write little stickies on all. They just make copies of them. And they go with each dog that goes out. Oh, these X-rays are good. These X-rays are good. And I saw a dog once that they said he was 3, and he looked like he was 6, and his hips were just shot. And I asked the handler, I said, "Did you X-ray these hips?" And he goes, "No, they came with them." I go, "I know. Did you X-ray them to compare them?" He goes, "Oh no." Well, you might want to do that. And he did, and found out that the X-rays that they gave him were not the X-rays of that dog. So they have to be made available to you at a minimum. And if you don't have a really good relationship with your vendor, you may want to have a new set taken. Not unusual at all to have these working dogs with mild dysplasia. It's not unusual. It's not a big deal. So if you're taking your X-rays to an OFA vet, he's got to remember that you're not breeding, you're working. 2 testicles, yes or no. That's all you need to know. It's not a deal breaker or maker, but you should know that because you may want to take remedial action regarding that. That wouldn't be a deal breaker for me, but I would definitely want to know that, and the customer should know that too. If the pet passport indicates that the dog is, say, 14 months of age, and there's a significant amount of tartar on the molars, that's a problem. This is a very common thing. The birth dates are not correct. And I'm not talking about a couple weeks or a couple of months. I'm talking about, maybe a year, 2, 3 years. The snout should not be unusually gray. You know old when you see it. You know a young dog when you see it. You can go, hey, this dog's got a lot of puppy in him. We got to let this guy grow up. But when he looks like he's been around the block a few times and they tell you he's only 12 months old, let your radar, listen to it. Checking for skin infection and fleas, that can be a big deal depending on the time of year. You're going to want to bathe them and get a good look at their skin when you do that. This should be part of your medical exam. If his overall physical condition is not acceptable to you, and he looks like he's just emaciated and just can't gain weight. A lot of dogs lose weight in the kennel because of kennel stress, but they shouldn't be severely underweight. Reject them. Don't take them. That's a problem. Check teeth, broken teeth, missing teeth, worn teeth. You don't want to buy a dog that needs a root canal right out of the gate. Let the vendor take care of that or the exporter take care of that. That should not be your problem. Because if you don't check the teeth and then you buy the dog and then a month later you see he needs a root canal because it's all infected, you're going to go back to the vendor and say, hey, you sold me a dog with a broken tooth. He's going to say, hey, you had a chance to look at him. You never said anything. That's on you. So you have to do that. Have the chip scanned. This is kind of important. Does it match the passport? And has the dog been scanned anywhere or chipped anywhere else? The DOD back in the day would chip their dogs towards the rear end because the most common place would be up towards the front, behind the neck, maybe in the withers between the shoulder blades. And they were finding that they were getting scammed by these exporters. So the DOD would chip the dogs, then they would test them. And if they returned them, they knew that they couldn't be sent back the way they used to be because you can't take the chip out once it's in there. And they'd rescan that dog. And if it already had the DOD chip in it, it went back automatically without any further discussion. So you want to make sure that your dog isn't being recycled to you. And that's one way to do it. Has the dog been neutered? Well, if he has been, I'll guarantee you that the odds are pretty good that the exporter didn't do it because that costs money. The importer probably didn't do it. He's probably been recycled and returned. So you're buying somebody's dog that came back to them. It's not normal to buy a dog that's neutered. Not 100% fraud, but it's not normal. So you want to check for that. Once the dog passes the medical screening, you want to test his environmental. Now, if you want to do it the opposite way, test environmental first, then medical, that's fine too. But you have to make sure that you're doing both. Take him to Lowe's, the depot, fire stations, anywhere you can, a public works department, and check him out. How does he behave when he walks into a new area? If the importer will only allow testing at his kennel, and a lot of them do, I'd walk away. That's a red flag to me. And if I couldn't find anywhere to go without only testing at that kennel, then I would do a boatload of testing after I left. It's just that a lot of guys have to drive, hundreds or thousands of miles and only to drive home and perform tests. And then you got to bring the dog back. And that's just not right. I just don't think it's right that vendors are going to say, I don't have time. I got a lot of customers. You got 2 hours to test your 7 dogs and 2 hours are up, you're out of here. That's pretty common. That's not okay with me. I don't like that. How does he behave when he walks into a new area? The key is recovery. So if the dog is hesitant going downstairs, going through a window that's on a door that they've never seen before, that's fine. Do they recover? That's what you're looking for. Slick floors are very common in a lot of these dogs that shouldn't be dual purpose patrol dogs. You will never fix that problem 100%. Never. Not 100%, so don't bother. Return him. He's got to go back. Here's one example of a test that is super easy to do. doesn't require any equipment or money. It's just environmental. And, you know, believe it or not, it's a strong test. Okay, is your dog social? If he's anything less than social around people before you've done any aggression or man work, return him. He's going to be a problem. You're not going to be able to do public demonstrations with him. He may be a one-man dog. You know, and if you're the type of handler that wants a really tough, hard mal, and you're willing to take that first bite from him so you can set the tone, okay, you know, that's fine, as long as you know what you're doing. Buying a working dog has to be like any other major purchase. You have to be ready to walk away. You would never go into a car dealership shopping for cars or trucks and buy the first day that you ever looked at something. That would not be a good idea. You need to think about it. You need to compare with other brands, other dealerships, or private parties, whatever the case may be. But you always have to be ready to walk. And if something doesn't pass your smell test, you got to get away. Beware of the seller who is trying to convince you that a certain dog is a good one. They shouldn't have to sell you. The dog should sell himself. If they need to sell you, then your radar should go off. Make sure you have enough time at the kennel to do the testing that you need to do. Don't be rushed. Establish a relationship with the importer if possible. Pre-order your dogs. You know, since the COVID we talked about before, as if the supply wasn't low enough before COVID, it's only gotten worse. And too many people have been financially ruined by this COVID and by the closing of these countries and their inability to engage in business. And you need to pre-order your dogs and get your name on that list and discuss with the vendor what he will allow you to do and what you can't do before you drive hundreds or thousands of miles to perform those tests. Talk with others who have purchased dogs from your vendor. Look at their dogs. Would you like a dog like theirs? How were they treated by the vendor or trainer? Never allow money to be the driving force in selecting your dog. That's just a bad idea. I'm not saying you got to spend crazy, stupid money, but money should not be the driving force. Quality should. Expectations between the vendor and the customer have to be realistic. You have to understand that your test also has to be realistic and that you're testing green dogs, not trained dogs. And in this category, finally, you need to stay connected with the industry. You know, network with professional organizations like the USPCA so you remain in the loop regarding training trends, litigation trends, and possibly learning about who the reputable vendors are and who they aren't. And finally, on the future supply, the outlook is not encouraging. The post 9/11 supply was very low, post COVID even lower, yet demand remains very high. So what does that tell you? That tells you that the fraud perpetuated upon unsuspecting agencies is going to get higher because these guys have got to sell their dogs, and they're in the business to make money, not pay shipping companies to ship dogs back and forth across the ocean. So, and along the related line, COVID has also had a huge impact on shelters and humane societies, where I know some agencies still go on occasion, particularly for single purpose, but occasionally dual purpose dogs. The shelters aren't as full as they used to be either. So that is another thing to think about. I'd love to hear questions, comments, and listen to what other people have to say. Thank you, Don.
Thanks, Steve. That was excellent material. Very, very informative. I appreciate you presenting that information. I thought it was great. Next, we have Dr. David Lou Ferlin, who is going to follow up with his thoughts on this topic.
Yes, thank you, Don. And of course, my thoughts to Sergeant Reisner and his family. And it's hard to go on, but we have to go on, and we will. And I wanted to thank Steve. First off, Steve, I think you're presenting some really high level information, and it was a nice presentation. Both presentations were very professional and quality, and I thank you for that. And I want to spend my time. I know, Don, you set other experts up to follow Steve, and I wanted to ask Steve some follow-up questions on some of the parts. And Steve, I assume you're still there, sir?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. So one of my questions are, I know you talked about the supply of canines and COVID and how that how all the different industry pressures have decreased the number of available dogs. And I'm wondering if us pulling out of Afghanistan is going to lower some of the numbers of dogs needed in the military, and if that will create a little bit more of a supply coming up in the next year.
Anecdotally, I would say that us being out of Afghanistan and Iraq probably, I mean, it just stands to reason that would be true, because it seems as though the DoD would need fewer dogs. They'd be better to answer that question than I, but it stands to reason, yes. But the problem with the COVID was when these European countries shut down, there's a whole chain of a food chain, for lack of a better term. The exporter is the final link in the chain that sends the dogs over to the U.S. But he's got people all behind him, the breeders, the raisers, the puppy raisers, and so on. Well, these people are poor in the first place, and they're unable to sell their puppies because their main client, the exporter, can't leave the country to ship the dogs. So they're saying, well, why would we raise more puppies if we can't sell them? So we're done breeding, we're done selling, we're done raising. And so that created a huge gap. And it'll take probably at least a year to recover, if it recovers, because many of these people have gone bankrupt. They went for a year without being able to generate an income.
And I know there's some other experts in our group here, and I welcome answers from them too. And I'm going to have a follow-up question. And I know you're in business, Steve, and I might be asking some not personal questions, but at least some business proprietary type of questions of you. But I'm wondering how much of a negotiating price room the consumer has when we're talking to vendors. How much of that dog price is negotiable?
Honestly, it's kind of like buying a car right now. Not really. It's if I can speak for myself. My price is my price. And I had a potential customer ask me a couple weeks ago, can I pay more money to get a better dog? And I said, no, I already get the best dogs I can possibly get. I already pay more than a lot of people do to get those dogs. No, it's not possible. I can get you less dog, and so can other vendors. I don't want to do that because I don't want my name on that. And so negotiable with some, yeah, you can get a cheaper dog, but you get what you pay for. And so in that sense, it's negotiable. In my sense, it's not. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. Does anybody else have some advice, perhaps, or maybe a different perspective? All right, I have a couple more, and like I said, I know there's other experts out here. And Steve, I think the information you're presenting to us is simply fantastic. And some of the advice you gave us, such as buyer beware and bring a subject matter expert into the process with you, somebody advocating for you, I think is terrific. And I know that when you buy a house, the homeowner has to disclose the known faults of the home. And, I come from a small estate, and generally, the type of dogs that I suspect we're seeing are those that have already been rejected by the federal government, which would pay more money for that same dog, or larger agencies, which have a little bit more of a deeper pocket than some of the agencies that I'm dealing with over here in New Hampshire and in New England. And I'm wondering if there is any type of disclosure that's either required, which I doubt, or one that I can ask the vendor, hey, who's looked at these dogs, and are they going to give me a straight answer? Probably not, but are they going to give me a straight answer? Is there some sort of disclosure that has to be given? Should I ask?
Nothing that's required. but if you're going to use good business practices, you need to be above board, not under the table. And so what I do, and I can't speak for other vendors, but I have them all vetted and blood tested and bathed. These dogs stink. You guys know this. They stink, man. And it takes 2 or 3 times to get it out of that ode to Slovakia off of them. But in doing the bathing, you can see a lot of things that may or may not be wrong with that dog. Skin infections, fleas. You don't have to do it. Hire somebody to do it, but it should be done.
Yeah.
And every dog should come with that negative blood test. And I worm them too, right away. It's at the end of the day, it's cheap. And so that's as much disclosure as I can give. If they only have one testicle, I tell them. And that may be negotiable, where I may give them a couple $100 off so that they can have the dog neutered if they choose. Other than that, I don't tell them that they may need a root canal, because if it needs a root canal, I don't buy them. So there shouldn't be anything medically like that.
But how about if like a large agency PD reviews one of your dogs and decides not to take the dog because it finds some fault with the dog?
Yeah.
All right. Now you still have that dog, and I would imagine you're still going to try to sell that dog. And here comes me walking into that training field, or that the yard, and you're going to show me this dog, and I say, hey, has anybody else looked at this dog? What would be the most likely answer?
Most likely answer is, I'm going to tell you exactly why they brought the dog back. I don't know that most people would. They need to sell that dog. Now, if they brought the dog back because he had an environmental issue, if I can't fix that issue, and I should have detected that, that's on me. If I can't fix that, then he's going back, and I'll lose money on the dog. But I can't sell that dog knowing that he's got a problem. You can't do it.
And there's nothing that legally requires you to disclose that once I ask. And to the lawyers out there, is there anything legally that I can throw in a contract that would force the vendor to disclose if the dog was a return dog? And the reason why I'm asking the return dog question is that is a real problem over here in Mass, New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont. Is they're putting return dogs for whatever reason into these agencies, only to find out much later, or perhaps never, that this dog was rejected for a certain reason. And it's almost like a fraud that occurs. So I'm wondering if there's something legally that I might be able to do as a purchaser of the dog that would require the vendor to disclose that the dog was previously tested by an agency, and so I could follow up with that agency to find out why it was rejected.
I think that you have a good point, and there are departments that do have separate contracts that include language like that. And I think that would be a good idea. And it keeps the vendor honest. If he chooses not to disclose, he's taking a risk. But it does give the customer something to fall back on legally, for sure. I think it's a good idea.
Steve White from Seattle has a question.
Well, actually, I just was piggybacking on that. I'd never thought of actually putting a disclosure clause in a contract. But my experience also is that vendors are loath to go with anything other than their contract. You try and, like our city has a standard contract, and we always wind up having to negotiate something in between the city's contract and theirs to finally get to something that we can mutually agree upon. Because the city's, writing contracts that strongly protects the city's interests. Vendors write contracts that protect their interests, and they're not going to look the same. And so I think in regard to your question, Lou, the need to disclose, I know some cities will have a publicly posted list of disapproved vendors. So if you wind up having an ethical problem with a vendor of whatever, computer parts, dogs, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't work, you can, your city can add that vendor to that. We will not do business with this person anymore. And that's the closest we can come, because I'll tell you that our city attorneys have said it's not worth the time, the PTM, the people, time, and money it takes to litigate over an $8,500 dog. They just don't want to do it. And that's my 2 cents on that topic.
Jump in, John. Oh,
Hi. The only thing I wanted to mention here is about communication between the vendor and the customer, the police department, is so important. If the vendor knows the type of dog I'm looking for in advance and has taken the time to listen to what type of testing I plan to do on that candidate when he gets here, I have a much better chance of getting a dog that's going to work. And the bottom line here is the vendor is in business to make money, and that's why he's here. And as a customer, I'm here to be satisfied and get a good product when I'm done, so that I don't cause harm to my agency or the public. So I still go back. The only way we can keep everybody honest is with a written contract. And going to Steve's point, if I take a vendor contract, it's going to be written in his advantage. If I take a department contract, normally it's going to be protecting their city or their municipality. Experience has taught me that the contract I would like to write to purchase dogs, probably no vendor is going to agree to, because it's too stringent on my side. So I've learned to bend with shipping costs, bend with warranties, and make it work, because I have to realize that the vendor needs to be here to survive, and we need a good dog. So there is a middle of the road here, but I can't stress enough, without having that written contract, without having that discussion with the vendor, and know he's really listening to you, it's not going to work. I mean, if I tell a vendor months in advance I'm planning to buy 7 or 8 canines in say March, I would hope that he's going to take some time to start looking for what I'm looking for. But if he shows up with 20 dogs in a trailer at 10 o'clock in the morning, and he expects to go home that night at 5 o'clock with my dogs picked, he wasn't listening to me, because if he knows the type of test I'm going to do on these dogs, it's just not humanly possible. So, it's important that we have this communication between us, because bottom line is, I've seen and I've experienced having a dog dropped with us that tested well, and then get it to the vet's office, missing a testicle, needing a root canal, and having heartworm, all in the same animal. And that's now the vendor has returned 3 or 4 states away, and now what do we do? Well, the standard answer in a vendor's world sometimes is, well, take care of it medically, and we'll take it off the price. Well, what they want to pay for the medical operation here is not acceptable to him there, and this never gets resolved, and that's why it's got to be in writing. It'll give everybody a clear understanding of what they've got, but it's important that we as a department never overstep our bounds and make it impossible for the vendor to survive. The second point I want to make is this: there's got to be a way that sometimes as law enforcement and a department, I'm my own worst enemy. So I've tested a dog and he's tested out pretty good, and environmentally he's good, and I have the dog 2 or 3 weeks, and there's an issue with this dog that I do not like. I see it. It might be he's too hard. And through my experience, I realize this is going to be a very critical area for this dog. The handler's doing everything right. My training's going right. And I've actually even surveyed this dog to 1 or 2 other people that are knowledgeable as trainers. And they kind of just shake their heads and go, you got a hard thing to do here. We have to be able to have a mechanism to wash that dog, because we're going to live with that dog for years to come. And I think as a trainer, my pride tells me, oh no, I'm going to fix this dog. let me tell you something. We're paying so much money for these dogs when they get here. And we don't have any rights to bargain at that point. We need a dog that's trainable all the way through. And hopefully I have expressed the test. And if we all miss something because we're human, the dog starts experiencing something that we didn't count on, there's got to be a mechanism where I can call up that vendor and have that discussion and make it work. One of the things I found that works really good is don't call the vendor up the day you've had it with this canine. If you see it happening in 3 days, 5 days, 7 days of training, it's time to get on the phone with the vendor then and have that discussion and let him know and see what he thinks. He might be able to help. And it's not a surprise any longer. And we can keep that vendor appraised of what's going on and make the system work. So I think there's some other people that want to speak to here. And I guess it all comes down to what I'm worried about is canine as an industry in the future, because we have some pretty challenging things happening in this industry on the tail end of it. You know, on the retail end, when we train this dog and put him out on the street, we have a lot of issues to deal with from day one. And it's important as a trainer, as an agency, that we stop looking at dogs as someone on our panel had said it before, it might have been Lou. I want a big black German Shepherd. That's not the way to test a dog or select a dog. It's got to be a test that works for the environment that you work in, the venue you work in, and what your purpose is. Single, dual, whatever. It's got to be driven there. And if we're all informed and do our jobs, a lot of the problems we have as law enforcement are our own cause. We cause them ourselves. So that's all I got, and I'll turn it back over to you. Steve, thank you for a very informative session so far.
John, that's John Kerwick, retired recently commander of New York NYPD's MTA program. Bill Finucane had his hand up. Bill, did you put it down?
Yeah, the question I have is, Steve, you're a vendor also, right?
Correct.
And do you find that, or do you also sell to these cargo companies that are looking for so many dogs?
I do not know.
Okay,
A majority of those dogs are single purpose dogs.
right, but
Yeah, I don't,
like you
sell.
said, with the supply over in Europe being so low, these vendors, I mean, these companies train dog, do quality dogs to fill their gap. So I think we're going to find that, you know, because even though the military is out, these vendors, I mean, these companies now taking the place of the military, taking these quality dogs from us. So I think we're going to see, you know, an increase in price and, you know, a decrease in the amount of dogs available to us. What do you think?
Bill. Thanks, Bill. I think Scott Sargent had his hand up next. Scott? Okay, anybody else?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
I have a new house, new Wi-Fi, and it doesn't work. So I apologize for being in and out. Actually, it's a question, kind of a question and kind of some insight. But Steve, what are the range of contract provisions you see for guarantee of performance? So performance warranty, performance guarantees, and for how long? Like a lifetime. Like I've seen a couple of them where it's anything over the period of a lifetime where the dog won't perform. He's too hard, too soft, whatever. He's returnable. I apologize if you've asked it, but if you've already answered. But how common are those kinds of provisions in contracts?
I don't think a lifetime is very common. Mine is essentially lifetime, so long as I did the training. The problem is that if I'm not doing the training and I don't know who the trainer is, that's a tough one for me to take. And you know, they can go out and this trainer could be from 30 years ago, old school, compulsion, and they have problems with the dog in 45 days, halfway through school, whatever the case may be, and they want to blame me for it. But to John's point, when you see a problem coming up, you need to point it out now. You got to call that, wherever you bought that dog, call and say, hey, just a heads up, I'm not giving up on this dog, but this is what I'm seeing. My response would be, send me some video, or I'm going to come out and look at this. I want every dog handler to succeed, no matter who trains them. This isn't just about selling dogs and making money. It's about furthering the cause. I mean, I'm still in it, even though I'm retired, just like you guys. I mean, you wouldn't intentionally do something to hurt the industry that you grew up in, and I'm no different. So 30 days is pretty common if you're not training it. 1 year could be pretty easy, pretty flexible. And if I know the trainer, I have no problem with a year. If you don't know within a year that dog's going to have an issue, you're going to. But lifetime, I would say pretty rare.
Thank you.
And that last speaker, Scott Sargent, by the way, is a former canine handler, LAPD commander of the Use of Force Division, and now an attorney. Anybody else would like to speak? Steve White.
I'm gonna circle back to the dog end of this because that's this is where Steve and I could probably sit down over beers and talk about this very subject for hours. This talk is centered on green dogs, mostly from Eastern Europe. And the market has shifted. Those dogs have kind of come into the fore as the most available. What do you see in the Western European market now? I know there are still some vendors bringing in Western European dogs. And in the old days, the Western European dogs were mostly sporty, whether it was IGP, Schutzen, KNVP, Ring, you name it. But it was a sport dog that for whatever reason didn't work out for the competitor. And that dog wound up going on the market and coming over here. And the European dogs are essentially bred and raised for the selection test. And, you're more likely to get a pure green dog out of Eastern Europe, although there are some sporty dogs coming out of there. So fill me in on where you see that distinction and, what the market is on them.
My experience with the guys in the West, mainly Holland, Netherlands, they still focus on sport. But like I said last time, there were only 200 and some KMPV PH1 dogs that came out in, 2019, I think. 200 and some compared to 600 and some in the late 90s. So even their ability to get quality sport dogs, and KMPV is a tough test. I mean, you guys, know that. That's a strong dog, and that's usually not a good dog for a brand new handler who knows nothing. You still see a lot of sport dogs coming out of Western Europe. The German Shepherd dogs that come out of Western Europe tend to be the ones coming out of the Czech Republic and the what we call them over there, the B and C quality dogs, because they can't always sell. The people that have got the A quality dogs, the top dogs in Eastern Europe, mainly Slovakia, are going through a breeding program, and they want to sell to the guy that's going to pay them the most money. And that's usually not the Dutch. The Dutch usually aren't going to pay you the most money. And the Dutch are super, super good at marketing B and C quality dogs, not only to the US, but other places in the world. They're very good at it. And they're historically very successful at it. Yes, you can get good quality green dual purpose German Shepherd dogs out of Western Europe, but the numbers are still in the East. Hungary, full of German Shepherds, tons of German Shepherds in Hungary, but the quality is not there, and they know it. And this is a small world. Everybody kind of knows everybody. And this is only my opinion based on my experiences. I don't know all of these guys, but that's what I see. I see more Dutchies and Mals coming out of Western Europe, as it has been in the past, and more sport oriented. You still have your 16-year-old kid that was given a dog as a kid, raised the dog to go to the IPO and title the dog and sell it. They still do that, just not like they used to.
If anybody in the audience would like to speak, this would be a good time. Raise your hand so I can't see you.
Don, I'll add some stuff if I can, just about contract stuff. I just want to make sure I gave, Steve gave a great presentation, and we heard really a lot about import, export, and contract stuff. A couple of things I want to think is important to make clear too. Basic contract stuff. It's important that agencies not void their warranty because they're not doing the training. So if there are cases I know where dogs have not performed, they were too hard or too soft, and they went to try to return them, and the trainer importer said, okay, well, show me your records and let's make sure that you've been complying with the terms of our agreement, and they couldn't do it. So they had set up their own separate training system. They didn't show up to training regularly. They missed certain dates. And the importer said, well, you didn't do what you were supposed to do with this dog, therefore I'm not going to be responsible for it. So the point is that agencies need to make sure that they're paying attention to their training regimen. And that goes to, maintaining an effective canine program as well. If you're not keeping track of your training records, you're going to create a problem for your agency and for yourself. And the dealing with new dogs is just another example of where that could occur. So it's important that everybody be checking their training records, make sure good records are being maintained by the agency. I wanted to talk a little bit about retirement stuff, contracts between agencies and retired handlers. I don't know if we're going to get into that later, or if this is a good time to jump into it. But I'll just touch on a couple of things if I can while we're kind of in this contract realm. Do breeding rights. Again, I apologize. My Wi-Fi went. I don't know if you touched on any of this, but what about breeding rights? Well, how does that come in with respect to the agency, with the handler? When the handler retires, what if he takes the dog and the agreement between the agency and the retired handler? What does it say about breeding? Is he allowed to take the dog and breed? Are handlers while working allowed to breed the dog? Those are all things that really need to be attended to in writing, and agreements need to be complete. I had a dog that retired, and the contract I had was not a good one. It was like 3 sentences long between me and the agency, and it was just it had to be kind of rewritten a little bit. And I've seen a few of those where the dog will retire for a minor injury after 2 years, and he comes home, and then he gets into an off-duty retirement bite in a circumstance in some public space. And the question is, well, what liability does the agency have? And what liability is no longer present and belongs solely to that retired handler? So without having specific answers for that can all be addressed in contracts between the agency and the handler. Yeah, that's really what I wanted to talk about. So I just wanted to touch on those things because those have come up, and I don't know if anyone has any insight into how those things are handled, or especially with a focus on retirement and breeding. If anyone else has any input. Thank you.
Steve Pearson.
Super good point on the training. Super good point. There are too many people out there getting dogs, and right out of basic training, they're done. They're finished. They got the dog because it's a take-home car. They got the dog because it was a pay increase, but they sure as hell didn't get the dog because they wanted to find bad guys. And it's sad to see, but Scott's point is super valid. There are a lot of people out there, and face it, there's a lot of departments out there whose canine unit supervisor is just the former dog handler. And he's really not paying attention because he hates paperwork and he doesn't want to check up on you, make sure you're doing your records, and it happens all the time. And so I don't think that point can be understated. That's super. My only experience with breeding is that around me, the department owns the dog, and if they allow you to breed it, the department will own the puppies. But I've never seen it happen. Most of the departments I've been dealing with would say, no, you can't breed that dog.
Steve, I have a question. Steve Pearson, I have a question for you. I've experienced a little bit in my time as a trainer about dogs that have been returned, and it's one of my no-nos about trying not to ever take a dog that's been returned. Do you have a thought or any information as to what some of the issues are that come when the dogs come back?
One that comes to mind is they came back to me. And it came back to me pretty quickly after the dog was vetted, because the vet at the U of M was an OFA vet, and he said that the X-rays of the hips were not suitable for OFA, and he would exercise the guarantee. And so the department called me and told me, and I know the vet's a great guy, but oh my God, is he picky? And I said, well, you're not vetting, you're taking x-rays for OFA certification. It's a working dog. And they said, well, we understand that, but what are they supposed to say when their vet says they should return them? No, you're wrong. He's their vet. And so I said, bring him back. I'll take him back. And then when the next customer who knew the first customer came along, I said, hey, this dog was brought back to me by this department, and here's why. Here's the x-rays. Do what you want. They bought the dog, and the dog is still alive. This was 10 years ago. And the dog worked his full life, and everybody's happy. I can't get mad at the department for doing that because they're following the advice of their vets.
Well, excuse me, go ahead.
You go ahead.
So to take a little bit deeper dive, this I'll open up to anybody. Are we opening ourselves up to some problems by taking some dog that's returned because the natural inclination is that this dog has been goofed up, screwed up, has behavioral issues now, or that didn't before? What is the thought on those kinds of returns?
Don, I'll just say a couple things and then I'll shut up. First of all, you should still have your testing that should be thorough. And second of all, this is where your relationship with your vendor comes in. You have to have a relationship with the vendor that you can trust, and that to know that they are not going to try to pull something over on you. And that's all I can say. I mean, I can tell you I've lost money on dogs because of things that I didn't find out, I didn't pick or notice when I bought them, and I brought them over here, and I got them here. And I'm thinking of one right offhand. Within the first 20 minutes, I just hit myself and say, why did I pick this dog? I hate this dog. Well, if I don't like him, why should I expect you to like him? He went back, and I lost money. But I still didn't have that dog out there with my name on it. That was important to me. So you have to have a relationship with your vendor to be able to trust him.
Thanks, Steve. Next, go ahead, Steve White.
Okay. I'll jump in on this real quick. Every dog that we're buying is a dog that somebody didn't want. Every dog that Steve brings in, whatever vendor you're dealing with brings in, is a dog that for some reason, somebody with a breeding program has decided that dog is not going to be retained in their breeding program because it is superior stock. You know, and the way that the way I break it down is, if I was going to try and breed the Seeger, the #1 German Shepherd in the world, I'm not going to sell my best stuff. My second best stuff is going to go to my colleagues that are close to me so I can keep my gene pool close at hand. Everything else goes to the highest bidder. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what we have to realize. At some point, somewhere in there, someone's made a decision, I'm going to move this dog along. And that can include another agency. And I am not so, I don't believe that what works for me in my agency and what I require to make a dog work in our context, I hold no illusions that somebody in a different environment, a different community, different geographical environment, isn't going to have different requirements that will work better for them. And so when it comes to whether a dog's been rejected or not, my answer is it depends. And I got to look at that dog. I'm going to give him a closer scrutiny than I would a dog that comes up. Maybe not. Because just because every good behavior says it's less about the story about how the animal got there. It's what the animal presents to you right then and there. Does it test well? Does it have, and that includes the veterinary test. That includes our performance tests and everything that we're looking at. If it does, and there's this thing in the background that they want to disclose or that you've heard about, if you can resolve it, that animal has, in my mind, has no more red flags against it than any other dog coming from Europe. But that's just me. And some of my guys will tell you that maybe I give everybody and everything too much slack. So
Thanks, Steve. Gene, your turn.
Thank you. Great job, Stephen and Steve White and everybody else. Hey, just a couple quick things from the legal perspective, and definitely make sure your agency attorney is involved in the process, particularly to review the contract. And there definitely has got to be the provisions in there, what to do if the dog is discovered to have some kind of injury or hip dysplasia or whatever it might be, what that return guarantee is going to be. And that's got to be in the contract. One of the other issues that came up is, what is the background of this dog? Was it returned from the military? Was it going to be referred to as a commando dog if that information ever gets out? Because if you get sued, many times the opposing counsel is going to ask about all the records you have on that dog. Where was it before you had it? Did another agency have it? Was it a law enforcement agency? Was it a military unit? What military unit was it? What did they use the dog for? Why was it returned? Did another agency return it, as we just discussed? Why was it returned? Did it ever have an unintentional bite of either a civilian or a fellow officer? What was done to correct it? So you have to be worried about the public relations aspect of the background of that dog. So just like we would do a deep dive into bringing personnel into a police department and hopefully into the canine unit, I think you need to do the same deep dive into the background of that animal that you're about to bring in, so that it doesn't have any negative connotations. Even the name of the dog could be considered to be an issue, as we have seen some states with the name of their dogs. You got to be really careful even about that now. So those are the issues I wanted to bring up. And again, as we all know in the contract world, it's buyer beware, and particularly with the issues of police service dogs, knowing that we're facing this massive outcry against biting dogs, we have to be sure that the dogs that you're going to be using are as perfect as you could possibly make them, both in training, purchasing, and the constant ongoing training. So that's really all I had to add today, Don. Thank you.
Thanks, Gene. John Kerwick, sorry.
Hi, everybody. Gene just covered exactly what I was going to say so eloquently. I'll just leave it there. Thank you, Gene.
Okay, anybody else? Steve Pearson, can you discuss the difference in the types of dogs represented by the following terms vendors use? Green, trained, titles, semi-titles, partially titled, etc.
yeah, and that should be titled as opposed to titles. I'm a lousy typist.
A green dog is my definitions. Maybe you guys have a slightly different. A green dog is a dog with no formal training. Most green dogs in the dual purpose sense have been built in the sense that, yes, they all bite a sleeve and or a suit, but they haven't received any formal training. Your green dog doesn't have an out. If he does, he's been trained, so he's no longer green. Your green dog may have been tested in the areas of search drive, but that doesn't mean they've been formally trained in a search. Obviously, your dual purpose dog is one that can do your patrol work, your man work, and your detection, whether it's explosives or narcotics. A titled dog is going to be typically an older dog, depending on the title that they're going to get, because the organization titling the dog requires the dog to be of an older age. A PH1 dog in KMPV, I believe, has to be at least 2. Some of you Mal guys might know better than I. Your IPO dogs can't get, I believe the BH title is the first title they can get, which is, I think, just companion animal dog. Basic obedience is 15 months, if I'm not mistaken. But you're not going to see a Shih Tzu 3 under 2 years old, or an IPO 3, I'm sorry. So your title dogs are your sport dogs, ZVV dogs, Czech military dogs. Those are all typically older and typically sport. I think my experience is the hardest titled dog would be your Camp EV title. They are the strongest dog. That is the strongest test that I've seen over there. Does that answer it?
Yeah. And Steve, do you see any drawbacks to getting a dog that has that level of training coming from Europe?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I do. Number one, you're going to pay more because they've got all that training into it. Number two, they're pretty easy to test because an older dog is what you see is what you get. They're no longer growing. They're no longer developing. But you don't know what their quirks are, and you're not going to see what their quirks are until you've got them and you're out working with them. And if you're not a strong handler with a titled dog, you may have a problem. I'm not saying you will, but you may have a problem. For me, I'd rather train a dog up my way and not somebody else's way. I'd rather take a young dog. You get a young dog that in 2 years is going to be a super strong dog, but you capture his brain when he's young. That's so much easier than trying to convince a 2.5-year-old strong male to let go. Right? I mean, if you guys have watched the Dutch train, they're tough and they don't take any crap from their dogs. And consequently, the dogs are tough. I want to take that strong dog when he's a kid and develop him just like I do my own kids. And rather than have somebody else develop him their way. And I'm going to save money by doing that.
Very good, Steve. Nice questions, Mr. White. For those that would rather ask a question, we have a thing on the lower right part of your screen. It's called in-call messages. If you would like to send a message rather than speak, you can do that and we will answer it. In the meantime, to the crew here that's in front of me, so oftentimes I know that we are advocating in the USPCA now that people have, and Steve, I think you brought it up today, Pearson, that we have, if you don't know anything about dogs, you should have someone that knows something about dogs assist you. But when you don't have a dog, I mean, you don't have someone there to help you, how do you determine what the dog that you're looking at, is that going to be for you? Is that going to be for what your department wants or needs? How do you determine that? Any thoughts? Anybody?
Well, I'll start with that, Don. One of my concerns over here is the smaller agency getting this Porsche dog that requires a whole lot of maintenance training, and probably the deployment of that use of force part of the dog is never going to be used in that smaller agency, when that smaller agency really wants to have a dog for search work of some sort and PR type of value. And yet they all want to have this high-driven Mally or similar type of breed of dog that is going to require all kinds of maintenance training. And then you couple that with a new inexperienced handler. And so they're getting a very good dog, and it's not the vendor's fault because they actually sold this agency a very good dog, but it's much too much. It is for the department that has purchased a Porsche, and it really needs to have a John Deere tractor instead. And that's a problem over here. They're getting oversold their dog. And I don't put that on the vendor. I put that on, to John's point, poor communication with the vendor, clearly outlining what the agency is going to be using this dog to do.
But how does someone who doesn't know about dogs approach a dog and how do they find out?
They shouldn't.
Go ahead, Steve White.
They shouldn't. That's the, part of the problem is, John Q. Public, most people coming into this, and novice handlers are there too, come in with their knowledge base about dogs consisting of, and this is going to be a reference that some of the younger people aren't going to get, but they think dogs can tell you that little Timmy's in the well at the old Johnson place. Or, that, Rennie will tell you that Rusty's in trouble at the old fort. And it doesn't work that way. Just because you had dogs growing up doesn't mean that you have the skill set required to assess dogs for law enforcement purposes. It's that simple. And the only way you get good at it is you make a bunch of mistakes and you learn from those mistakes and you adjust. The reason I am so grateful for this presentation by Steve Pearson is because he's been in the business 30 years doing the job, and then now he's out there providing dogs. And so he provides a unique perspective on what we need. He understands it from the vendor's perspective and from the officer's perspective. He's made a bunch of mistakes. I know, because he talks like somebody who has paid the price of making those mistakes and now proceeds a little more judiciously, and also is willing to admit that he doesn't know. Sometimes you just don't know, and you just got to wade into this as best you can with the knowledge base you've got. And if you need to outsource it, you outsource it. At the beginning, Steve opened up and said, you need a subject matter expert. If you're going to do this, don't do it by yourself. If you're new to this business, find a John Kerwick, find a Lou Furlan, find a Steve Pearson, find a Don Slavic, find somebody, find a Scott Sargent who's willing to come out there with you. Somebody who's had a lot of dogs pass through their hands in the course of their life, a lot of working dogs pass through their hands in the course of their life. And they can get it. I know, for example, our first veterinarian that we had for the Seattle Police Canine Unit, he knew better than we did when a dog got put up on that exam table, whether it had it. And he literally called it it. And he could pick it. He could pick it better than a lot of the handlers could. And he was picky about hips and things like that, Steve, but he understood that compromises have to be made. Everything's about trade-offs. What are you willing to give up to get what you want? And sometimes I'm going to give up perfect hips to get the temperament and the working qualities that I want. And I wouldn't go the other way around. I wouldn't take a dog with perfect hips, but if it wasn't ready to do the work, I'll sacrifice a year or two of working life to give that dog a comfortable retirement if it really gives me everything I need in those few years that it has.
Scott?
Good points. We've talked a little bit going back and forth about the needs of the community versus the dogs that sometimes find themselves on the street. As everyone's aware, these friends groups or civilian groups are coming up with a lot of money sometimes. I've seen them come up with just a ton of money, and the agency isn't quite sure what to do with it. So they end up buying and putting all that money into investing in a dog, into a great dog. They have one opening coming up, they have fairs, they have festivals, they gather all this cash together, and they basically hand it to the agency. Well, without having that right importer, that right person to make the decision, that money is often handed to the wrong person. If I'm sure a lot of you have seen this, and that's the person that makes the decision as to what dog they get. So what is that person who might be a senior person in the canine unit, or a friend to canine, or just the handler, the new handler? Here's the money, go buy a dog. And off they go with or without the right guidance, and they're getting these machines, and they're coming back with these machines because they're great animals, and this dog will search and find. The conflict is that that's not what the community needs, and that's really not the best investment for the agency. Sure, that dog might be going 100 miles an hour, but it's going to need a racetrack to be performing at that level, so to speak. So I think that's an important point that Lou made. There's oftentimes a distinction between what the community needs and what the agency ends up with, because they don't trust the right person to make the choice or really interpret what they're going to need. But if you were to actually go to the community and ask them what they're looking for, or even to the chief, what is it you want in a police dog? If you got his attention and you actually asked, they would tell you exactly what Lou said. I want a dog who's not going to tear people up on the Channel 4 News, who's not going to, create major litigation headaches for us, and is going to be a great public relations asset down the road. Because really, that's more leaning towards what we're going to need in the future. But we're not trusting the importer, the right person to make those decisions. So I think that I was just kind of adding to that point. So it's important to make sure we're adding, knowing what the community and the agency actually need before we are getting those dogs and putting them on the street.
Thanks, Scott. So I'd like to leave you with a little information about our next webinar, which is called Canine Command and Control from the Ground Up. Canine deployments are often dynamic, high-stakes events. In this presentation, we will lay out principles, tactics, and strategies for controlling the chaos of everything from the simplest searches to multiple agency and multiple suspect events. We will discuss the roles and responsibilities of canine search team members as well as overall incident command. You will learn when you will need to take the lead, and more importantly, you must know when you must cede that role. We appreciate everything that you do for us, those that are out there working law enforcement still. More importantly, we are happy to see you here. Our webinars are designed not to ask for membership, but to get the word out about topics that are in today's news all the time. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to say before we finish? Thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar, which is Canine Command and Control from the Ground Up. Thank you very much.